The Thanos Snap Hexer is by far my favorite build. It has a lot of things going for it. In a single brutal snap, you inflict on the enemy burning, poisoned, slowdown, weakened, and sapped. And since you do damage from every element in equal measure, you fully benefit from having all boons active, more so than any other build. If your Torment didn't kill an enemy outright, your next snap absolutely will. There are a lot of ways to play a Hexer, but in my opinion, this is the best. Now, as impressive as it is, my favorite thing about this build is that it's not quite as brain-dead as other endgame builds. Yes, your Torments and Ruptures are your bread and butter, but you do still have to apply those hexes to make use of them, which means getting 6 consecutive hits with your saber. Let's go through the build's main gimmick and then optimize it step by step. The most important part is using a steel saber with the Rainbow Hex enchantment. It takes 6 consecutive swings to build up, and on the last hit, all 5 elemental hexes will be applied at once. Now, some people put their Rainbow Hex on the Cerulean Saber instead, but the Steel Saber actually has a 10% faster swing speed, and since our hexes are our main damage source, using the Cerulean Saber would actually result in a loss of damage per second. With all of our hexes applied, we can now cast Torment, doing a big chunk of damage, and severely weakening the monster. All the debuffs you apply are useful, but the most damning are the weakened and sapped debuffs, which reduce how much damage an enemy can do to you by almost half, and lasts much longer than the monster will. Then you can find an opening to cast Rupture. Rupture removes all hexes from the enemy, and does 50 damage for each hex removed. Now this damage is enough to finish off almost anything, but if you are fighting one of the tougher monsters or a boss, you can use Rupture's unique properties to complete the rotation. You see, Rupture doesn't just do damage. It also does stability damage, and it doesn't do it all at once. It damages the enemy 1 hex at a time, dealing successive damage. You can take advantage of this delay, and attack the enemy just as its stability bar gets to 50% to safely reapply your hexes and begin your rotation over again. And that's basically it. Let's move on to optimizing the build as much as possible. From the Cabal Hermit, we want 2 skills. To begin with, we want the Shamanic Resonance passive to increase how much elemental damage we deal with all our boons. And more importantly, we want the Infuse Wind skill to increase our swing speed further and apply our hexes even faster. Under any other build, I would likely never use the Infuse Wind, because it doesn't let us infuse our weapon with any other element, and it also burns our stamina at a rapid rate. But in this case, we only care about how fast we can get those hits in, not how much damage they do. And because we are taking the Hexmage Breakthrough Bloodlust, any stamina we burn is immediately refunded once we kill whatever we are fighting. So it synergizes perfectly, allowing us to enjoy all the benefits with none of the cost. From the Hexmage tree, apart from the skills we already mentioned, we want the all-important Lockwell's Revelation, which increases our elemental damage by 15% when tired, and 30% when very tired. Finally, we want Alchemical Experiments from the Levant questline. Now from the Three Brothers DLC, we want just a few things to reach peak performance. The Arena passive Brains, which gives us another 15% damage at the cost of physical damage we don't care about, and the Shimmer Potion, which gives us 15% elemental damage increase and +6 barrier to boot. Both effects last for 3 minutes, and happily, the potion is not hard to make. The recipe is 2 peach seeds, water, and 1 chrysocolla beetle, all of which can be gathered fairly easily. You can get peach seeds by cooking any peaches you find or buy, Plus, they don't spoil, making it easy to make potions on demand. The chrysocolla beta can be found in oil nodes in the caldera. I also highly recommend that you use 2 of your resource building slots to get the alchemist and chef's buildings, as they always carry a significant quantity of those ingredients. Now at this point, we've gone almost as high as we can go. There are armor sets that boost elemental damage, but because our damage is split 5 ways, there's almost no reason to go after armor that doesn't boost everything at once. For example, if an armor says that it boosts fire damage by 10%, it would only improve our overall damage by 5%, which is trash. There is, however, one set of armor that boosts all of our elemental damage by 15%, if we wear the full set. It suffers from 3 problems, however, that I find deal-breaking. The armor is unavailable until the end of the DLC, which makes it impractical to plan to get to complete your build, since most of your playtime will be spent without it. Even worse is that the armor stats are garbage. It has a miserable physical resistance, no barrier, no protection, no magical resistance of any kind, and it reduces your status effect resistance. Now I don't know about the rest of you, but I play on hardcore, and by definition that means I am not using this thing. Finally, it also suffers from being probably the ugliest armor in the game, which, in my opinion, is the worst of its crimes, and more than anything else, that makes it unusable. So what should you use? Well, I have my preferences, but ultimately it doesn't affect the build, so you should use what you want to. You may have noticed that up to this point I haven't mentioned trinkets, or what third breakthrough you should get. Well, that's because the core loop of the build is more or less finished, and you have a lot of room to personalize it as you like. That said, I do think there are 4 options that are better than the rest. The first 3 have to do with elemental vulnerability, and how much extra damage it nets you per snap. You can use any of these 3 trinkets as an opener to inflict the debuff, and then proceed to use your saber to apply the hexes. The damage increase granted by elemental vulnerability is significant. As an example, let's calculate how much damage our rupture could potentially do. With all our buffs, our rupture will do roughly 512 damage. That's a huge amount. But with elemental vulnerability, our number changes from 512 to 640. That's an increase of 128, which is certainly nothing to sneeze at. However, there is a 4th option. The Awakened Chakram Distorted Experiment has not reached much popularity so far, and that's no surprise. It would only really be useful in a build exactly like this one that makes use of increasing all elemental damage at once. With all of our buffs, our chakram does 73 fucking damage. So per pierce, it does something like 147 damage. Every arc does 110, and if every hit of Chakram Dance connects, it does 295 damage. Even with a single pierce, we've more than made up the damage that we would have had by having elemental vulnerability. Apart from helping us do more damage, the Distorted Experiment is also more practical. You see, there are only 2 kinds of fight you are going to encounter in Outward. Fights with normal enemies, and in that case, not even the strongest are going to last even a single rotation if you have your buffs on, with or without elemental vulnerability. And there are fights with bosses, and in those fights, the shield and the pistol are unreliable, somewhat. Because if you mess up the rotation, or the rupture doesn't do enough stability damage, you could be quickly unable to apply the next batch of hexes for a while. Now that's not the end of the world if you know what you're doing. But it's also not a problem that chakram users have. With proper use of the distorted chakram, not only do you always have easy access to reapplying hexes, but with a few smart uses you quickly make up whatever damage you missed out on by not having elemental vulnerability. Now, just to keep a few things in mind. First, you are getting the arena passive brains, which means you won't have access to the arena weapon skills, which is a shame, because the one-handed sword's weapon skill is actually quite good for this build. It does 6 rapid strikes, which conveniently is exactly how many we need to apply our hexes. It's nice to have, but with Infuse Wind, we are almost as fast. So if you don't have a friend who has the arena weapon skills, it's really not that big of a deal. Second, if this build has a weakness, it's that it struggles a little bit to deal with more than one enemy at a time. You can't do your really big damage until the hexes are applied, which is even more reason to take a chakram in my opinion, as it makes dealing with groups much more manageable. Though admittedly, Ice Bullet also works well. And finally, the toughest thing about this build is that it takes a long time to get it going. In fact, it may take longer than any other build out there. The Rainbow Hex Saber has a very specific conditions to make. None of the 4 trinkets I recommended are easily gotten, and some could take quite a while since it's random. The pistol, although it's not random, is behind a side quest, and really, to use it well you might want to get 2, or even 3, which could involve a lot of waiting. If you persevere, however, I think the build is worth it. I've played Outward for a long time, and it's the most fun way I've found to play, with you weaving in and out of melee combat, and having to manage both your magic and stamina bars effectively. Then ending it all at once in one big damage explosion. Alright, I think I've covered everything. Please let me know if you have found interesting variations of the build, or if you think there's a way to make it any more optimal. As always, thank you for watching.